My name is Julia. I am the new owner of Formaggio Kitchen. I worked at Formaggio Kitchen for 16 years, and it was meant to be a 3-month job, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And kind of the rest is history, not to be cliche, but I just dug in. And I remember early on, I told myself, if I ever get bored or stop learning or, don't feel like I want to go to work, then, I'll go back into my real profession, so to speak, which was public health. And I never got bored and I never stopped learning. And while I am the olive oil buyer at Formaggio Kitchen, and I've studied and learned as much as I can about olive oil, I've done some professional judging of olive oil, but that I do not, I still feel like there is loads and loads and loads for me to learn. So I'm excited to continue my education with olive oil. So I do encourage everybody tonight to ask a lot of questions. If I have the answer, I will definitely let you know. If it's something that I don't know, I will also let you know that I do not know it, and I will find the answer for it and email the group afterwards. During this event tonight, it looks like we have a smaller group tonight, and I would encourage you, if you have questions or comments as we're tasting, to you can unmute yourself and share with the group, or you can use the chat function, whatever is most comfortable for you. But we are going to start. Does everybody have their olive oils kind of ready to go in front of you? Thumbs up. All right, perfect. So we are going to be tasting 4 olive oils tonight, and they're going to be tasted in order from mildest to most intense. But before we do that, I always find that it's best to talk about olive oil and how it's made. And that kind of will give you a better sense of what you're looking for and what you're tasting. So olive oil is a process that is made from the fresh olive. So what happens is there are several processes when you're making olive oil. So step 1 is the harvest. So picking the olives from the tree. And that can be done at a number of different stages. However, you do need to time it well. If you pick your olive too early and it's underripe, your olive oil is going to be pronouncedly bitter. If you pick it too late, your olive oil is going to be a little bit fermented and oxidized. So you want to pick it at the peak of ripeness, and then you want to then next take it to the mill. And so when you mill it, you are literally pressing the olive into a paste. At this point, hopefully you've separated out most of the leaves and branches, but there's always trace amounts that are left behind. And so you're crushing the oil. And this can be done in one of 2 ways. You can do a more modern mechanical press, which is what most people opt for nowadays, or you can use traditional old stone mills. And oftentimes you think, traditional is better, but in this case, even the traditional makers are opting for the more modern method. And that is because time is the most critical factor in making olive oil. And that is because of oxidation and how that imparts different characteristics and flavors in the oil, and also affects the acidity levels. So if you're using these traditional stone mills, that's going to be about 30 to 40 minutes of milling to get it to a proper paste. If you're using the modern mechanical method, then it takes really minutes. And so you cut down on the time that you would potentially basically expose the olive oil to oxidation. So at this point, you have a paste, and you've got all of the pulp and everything mixed together. At this stage in the game, the producers put the olive paste into a bin, which slowly spins and churns. And that's called malaxation. And that process happens for about 20 to 30 minutes. And the reason for that is because when you're pressing the olive oil, the oil and the water actually becomes emulsified. And so you need to de-emulsify that water and separate it out from the oil and the solids. And so the malaxation process is slowly churning. And what it's doing is it's helping those water and oil molecules find each other and get larger and larger. So then it is easier to separate. So you have that nice slow process. And then last but not least is the separation, which typically is done in a centrifuge so that you can separate out the olive oil from the water. And it's also can be more commonly, folks are decanting, they call it, which is just another similar method of separating out the olive oil from the water solids. Then you are left with your olive oil. At this point, it is unfiltered. It is ready to go. You can consume it as is. There's a question of filtration, and what that means is whether or not you filter out the sort of fine particles in that oil that might still be present after the process. And that's really up to the maker. And I have a producer in Greece that I work with, and we frequently decide to have his newest harvest be unfiltered. And then later on in the year, we do a filtered version. And the reason for that is, and I'm going to go back to oxidation and water, because it's such an important factor in the process of making olive oil and the quality of olive oil. There's always going to be residual water left if there are particles in the oil. Now, if you're consuming the oil right after harvest within a few months or so, no big deal, not a problem. You're going to taste an incredible vibrancy, even more flavors in the oil, which is why I love a freshly harvested, unfiltered oil. However, if you want that oil to last you till the end of the year, or it's been about 9 months since the harvest date, you're better off with a filtered oil to get all of those particles out so that your olive oil has a more extended lifespan. I know that's sort of the quick version. Does everybody kind of get a general overview on kind of how olive oil is made? I'm seeing some nods. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, yeah.
Are the pits separated out at any point, or is that also in the ground up?
It is also in the ground up paste. And so you'll find there's several different types of olive oil, and what we're going to be talking about tonight is virgin olive oil, both extra virgin and virgin. There's also pomace oil and refined oils. Pomace oil, you can take the sort of sludge that's left over and use chemical methods to extract more oil from it, which is more of like an industrial style oil. And then refined oil is oil that most likely had the intent of being virgin or extra virgin, but did not qualify due to acidity levels being too high or too many defects in the oil. And so therefore you have to undergo a chemical, you have to basically chemically alter it to make it consumable. So oftentimes light olive oil and things like that are not classified as extra virgin or virgin are refined oils, because they must be further refined to remove those defects to make them fit for consumption. But for our purposes, we're going to be focused on there's a lot of names when you read an olive oil bottle. You see first cold pressed, and What that just means is, these olive oils aren't really being pressed a second time, but what it's referring to is the fact that you're using that original pulp that you're extracting the olive from. The cold pressed, there's no technical sort of definition for what that means temperature wise, because olive oil is produced in a lot of different regions, from colder regions in northern Greece to warmer regions in like Tunisia. And so what it means is you're not artificially heating the oil to easier extract it. So the goal is because if you heat an oil too high, it does affect the quality of the oil. And so that's all that refers to, is when you see first cold pressed. Extra virgin versus virgin is really referring to two key points. To be an extra virgin olive oil, it must satisfy two classifications, and one is the acidity level must be lower than 0.8%. And it must be actually judged by a panel in the EU, that is the International Olive Oil Council. The United States does not have a governing body of olive oil, but there are several sort of voluntary panels essentially that will grade your olive oil using the same methods as the International Olive Oil Council. And so they are a reputable way of measuring that it is extra virgin. And that is basically looking for defects in the oil. And so to make sure that the oil does not have any pronounced defects. If it does, then it goes down to the virgin category. So does that make sense? All right, so what we're tasting tonight is 3 extra virgin oils and 1 virgin oil. And the funny thing is, and I'm going to go into the virgin oil because at the very, very end, it's going to be the last one we're tasting, because and give you a little bit of insight into why they've decided to classify it as a virgin oil, because it very well could be classified as extra virgin. But for a number of reasons, the company has decided to classify it as a virgin oil. Are y'all ready to start tasting? Okay, so now color means nothing. So that's why I'm tasting in these sort of pottery bowls, because technically speaking, you're not supposed to influence yourself by looking at the color. Now, if you're doing a professional tasting, 4 is the maximum number of olive oils that you can do in a sitting. You should be doing 4 oils, and ideally with a short break in between each one, where you can have a sip of water. If you have an apple or something like that, or a carrot stick, it's always a nice way to clear your palate. That is the best way to taste the oil, because what we're going to be doing is really tasting the oil on its own. If you have it with bread, you have a separate influence. And don't get me wrong, we are definitely going to enjoy the bread with the oil. But to taste and appreciate the oil on its own, we will be tasting it straight. And don't be afraid to don't take a gulp. We're not going to be, taking huge chugs of olive oil tonight, but you want to have enough so that you can fill your palate. So think about a teaspoon of oil is what you're looking for, because your goal is, it's very similar to wine tasting. You need it to hit every part of your mouth. And oftentimes you do slurp it so that you can spread it to the back of your palate. It's been scientifically proven that your palate tastes different flavors in different places. So your goal is to really get it all around. And the difference with wine is there is no spittoon. You actually do have to swallow the oil as part of the tasting. Of course, you can do whatever you want, but when you're doing a professional tasting, you do have to swallow it, because the effect on your throat is actually part of the judging that you're going to be thinking about. Does it burn? Is it peppery? Does it make you cough? So what we're going to be thinking about when we taste this oil is, the first thing is aroma. And where did I put my, okay. So I got a little plate to cover the oil. So I just basically created a little lid and I'm swirling it around. And what you're going to do is that's just going to release a lot of aromas, but because it has a lid on, you can use your hand if you have a wine glass or something like that. But having a nice little cover, or if you have a really nice wine glass, then oftentimes that will contain it enough. And you just kind of swirl it around to open up those aromas. And the first thing that you're going to do is smell. So the first oil that we're going to start with is the wild poppies. This is going to be the mildest of the bunch. So I'll let y'all get that out. I'm going to take a little sip of water to get ready. All right. So now if you really, I did not want to get this far with you, but on your own, technically speaking, olive oil should be tasted at exactly 80 degrees, or I'm sorry, that's between 80 degrees and 84 degrees. Sort of give or take, it's 82 degrees with a plus or minus of 2 degrees. So if you really want to geek out, you can put it in a hot water bath with a thermometer and get it up to 80 degrees. And that does actually help release more aromas. But for the purposes of this, room temperature is going to be just fine. So give it a swirl and then give it a smell. All right. All right. For the person who just entered, we are starting with the wild poppies olive oil. So now you can see sometimes I'm going to re-swirl it because after you lift the lid off, you lose some of that aroma. Because you really want to think a lot of the vocabulary when you are thinking about olive oil is like artichoke and grass and butter. You want to think fruity. And then for defects, I actually have the formal kind of listing of what they consider defects are fusty with a muddy sediment, musty, which we all know musty. And that's the best way I think about musty is if you smell your olive oil and it smells like wet cardboard, it's done, it's rancid. But that's sort of the musty, winey, vinegary, sour, like wet wood is also a defect. Rancid, of course, metallic, and let's see, I think those are the most sort of pronounced negative qualities that you want to avoid in an olive oil. When judging an olive oil, there's 3 main sort of categories you're going to think about, and that is the fruitiness. Is it a green fruit or is it a ripe fruit? And the fruit we're talking about is olive. So think about the quality of a green olive versus a ripe olive. And then bitterness. Bitterness is not a negative attribute in olive oil. It's actually indicative of higher levels of polyphenols, and typically indicative of an olive that has been harvested very quickly. And then pungency. And what pungency means is actually pepperiness. And so how much spice is there? Is there that sort of pronounced pepperiness? And so with this one, this is from Aptos, California. When I smell it, I just get an amazing artichoke note. That's the most pronounced smell that I get. And then tasting it, and I drank a lot just then, a little bit more than I intended, but it did get the back of my throat. I'm getting a little bit of pungency on that, but I'm getting in the flavor that the artichoke does carry through, but I'm getting a really nice sort of buttery quality, which is quite nice. Michael and Ellen, I see that you guys got the pungency. And that's really good though, because when you think about it, it is an attribute that you can think about when you're cooking or adding it to your food, because that sort of peppery quality can really add a beautiful element to the meal. So this is a Tajiasca olive. This is grown in California, but the trees were actually brought in from Italy. And so it's an olive oil producer. They're two sisters, and they are wanted to basically grow and harvest Italian style olive oil in California. And so what you want to think about when you're tasting the oil, of course, is and I talk about this, if anybody has taken a class from me, I talk about the storytelling of tasting, the beginning, the middle, and the end. A good product has the same attributes of a good story. It's got a great beginning, which is the smell, the aroma. It's got a great middle, and that's the flavor when it's in your mouth. And then how does it finish? I still have a little bit of kind of burning on my throat, which is great. It's not a negative thing. It doesn't feel, too intense. I love that. You want to think about the texture of the oil. And I know that sounds weird, but how does it coat your palate? Is it heavy on your palate? This one to me is a little bit heavier, more like butter. And some of them can feel a little bit lighter and livelier and greener. And so that's something to think about. And when thinking about a lot of these oils, a lot of people ask, how do I use it? Ideally, you want to use this as a finishing oil, but none of these, they're going to lose some of their properties as you cook them. Olive oil does lose its health benefits if you cook it, just in case anybody is interested in that aspect of olive oil. But and when I say loses its health benefits, I don't mean that it's got a lot of polyunsaturated fats, which is a great substitute for saturated fats. So if you're doing an even swap for this and butter, then great. However, when you're thinking about the polyphenols, then that actually is affected by heat and cooking. And it's also affected by harvest style and production methods, which we'll talk about as we get a little bit later on into the tasting. But what did you all think about that first oil? It's a very classic. So this is an oil that Tajiasca is a Ligurian olive. Awesome. A Ligurian olive that is actually known for being one of the more delicate olives of Italy. And obviously terroir matters. And that means where it is grown really does matter. So having Tajiasca olive oil grown in California is going to taste drastically different than Tajiasca olive oil that's grown in Italy. But they still obviously do retain a lot of similarities in the style of the olive itself. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one, which is the Mitira. This is from Lesvos, and we're the exclusive importer of this olive oil. I found it in Greece last year, and I was really, really, really happy to find it because I was on a hunt. I love Greece. You'll notice by our growing Greek selection of products, I very much love Greece. But the majority of olive oil in Greece is the Koroneiki variety. And I started talking to olive oil, and I love Koroneiki olive oil, and we have several on our shelves. But I asked a lot of producers, because it's not the only native varietal in Greece. And so I said, why Koroneiki? Why are we seeing this almost exclusively throughout Greece? And why are we not seeing more native varietals? And the reason is it is a very fast growing tree. It's a tree that is very, very easy to harvest. It is not susceptible to as much damage and disease, so damage during harvest and disease. And so when I went to Crete, they do have a native varietal in Crete, but Lord knows I could not find a producer of olive oil of that native varietal because almost all of them had been replaced by Koroneki, because the native varietal is this teeny tiny olive with a really large pit, very hard to produce. It oxidizes very quickly, and it's a very sort of finicky olive. And so it became kind of a mission to find a little bit more diversity of olive oil in Greece. And so I was really, really thrilled because I found the Mutira, which is from the island of Lesbos, and it's two native varietals. The first one is Kelovi, and the second one is very hard to pronounce, and I have it written down, Adramitiana. I might have pronounced that wrong, but I was really thrilled to taste it because it did taste drastically different than a lot of the other Greek oils that I had tried. And when you think about olives that are easy to cultivate, it's not made to judge because I'm not an olive oil farmer. And I want to talk a little bit more about water and oxidation really quickly, and why it matters so much. When you think about an olive and the cell structure of an olive, you have all of these cells, and what is important to keep in mind that is if any of those cells are damaged, then you basically break a barrier which is keeping water from the pulp of the olive, from the fruit of the olive. The second that water touches the fruit of the olive, it begins the process of oxidizing. And when you start the process of oxidizing, the free acids go up and up and up, and the acidity of your oil is going to go up and up and up. And so when you have a ripe black olive, it has undergone, a nice fermentation, and it's lived a little. But when you're making olive oil, you traditionally want an olive that is very freshly picked without any blemishes, because and that's part of this harvest and sorting, because you really do need to sort out those olives that have been damaged. Now, you'll hear sometimes farmers complaining of a hailstorm, and you may think, why does that matter so much? But if you get a really intense hailstorm, that hail hitting the olives can actually damage it enough to start the oxidation process. And if it does start the oxidation process, then that olive is not suitable for using an olive oil. And so that is why so many producers pride themselves on picking the olive oil or picking the olives and harvesting it very, very quickly, sending it to the mill very, very quickly, using a modern press to press it very quickly so that the process is fast, because you're not allowing any oxidation to take place, which allows you to retain more polyphenols, which is often where you get that sort of peppery quality. More pepper and bitterness generally indicates more polyphenols, but it also indicates a higher quality of olive oil because it has a lower acidity. And so that's why, the production, the farming, all of that really, really does play a huge part in the quality of oil. All right, so oil number 2, the Mutira, just as a reminder. All right, so now we're going to Greece from California. So for me, this is a lot lighter, but much grassier in the nose. So it almost flips it on the head. Sorry. Teaching while tasting olive oil is a new new challenge uncovered. All right. So this one, the reason I loved it when I tasted it the first time is the complexity. And I'm still getting that complexity where it's really doing a lot. And when I smelled it, I smelled a little bit of grassiness. It definitely did not have as strong of a nose as the wild poppies did. But it was just a very pleasant, lightly grassy, sort of almost like, hey, I grew up surrounded by wheat fields. So that sort of changing from when the wheat is green to dry, that like sort of beige brown color, that's kind of what the smell reminds me of. And then the beginning is a little bit more sort of buttery and mild. I don't get a ton of grassiness, but then I get artichoke and pepper on the finish, which is really, really, really nice. A little bit of pepper, definitely not as peppery as the first one. But what did you all think of that oil? Thumbs up? Did anybody notice kind of a distinguishable difference between the two? These two do have a lot of similarities, but I think you guys detected some difference.
Tasted so much on the back of my throat as the first one.
I totally agree. The first one was definitely a little bit more moderate and then really hit that back of the throat. This one had a lot of flavor on the finish without that intense pepperiness, which is really, it's just a different style. All right. One thing to talk about, because olive oil is amazing and we love cooking with olive oil at Formaggio Kitchen. When you're using it for dipping, which again, I'll mention the pull-on bread, which is awesome. This is a bread that's made in Paris and we fly it in once a week. And it's a bakery that's been in business since the 30s. And they have a specific recipe that is done all by feel. There's no weights or measures to it. And they use a natural leavener and they bake it on the stone floors using wood fire. And that's why the crumb is so small. And the crumb just refers to the kind of amount of eyes in it. And then the crust you can see is incredibly thick. And it's a lot of people, are like, oh, bread must be had on the day that it's baked. Which there's definitely something to be said for that. But this style of bread, which is called a levain, is a hearty sourdough that is meant to last for quite a while. And so you can cut it, you can toast it, and it just kind of keeps, refreshing itself. And then what I'd recommend when you're tasting olive oils is to add salt to your dipping oil. I know a lot of people love to add garlic and herbs and spices, and that's all up to your own preferences. But if you want to taste the olive oil just on its own with bread, I highly recommend salt, and it will blow you away the difference in flavor and how much more you actually taste when you add a little bit of salt to that olive oil for when you're dipping it. And it's a really great way for that olive oil to hold up to the flavor of the bread. And it really just brings out a lot. And when you're cooking with olive oil, people talk about finishing oils versus cooking oils. And I think that you should always use a good quality oil either way. Obviously, price is a factor because if you're cranking through a lot of olive oil, you don't want to have an incredibly expensive cooking oil. I buy the Riza, which is a Greek one, in 3 liters. That's my favorite cooking oil because you get a lot of bang for your buck. But I would still use it as a really quality finishing oil as well. The reason I like that one for cooking, in addition to the price, is that it doesn't have the peppery finish. So I don't feel like I'm masking anything or kind of altering the oil too much. And then when you think about Shush. Well, I knew she was going to make an appearance at some point. When you think about cooking, a lot of people think that um, frying with olive oil is a no-no, and that's not exactly true. The smoke point of olive oil is 380 degrees, and you can get a really nice, delicate fry between 350 and 375. So as long as you're careful with the oil, and it's not the type of oil that you crank up the heat and leave it on and forget about it. It will start to smoke and it will affect kind of the pungency and the quality of the oil. But if you wanted to fry a piece of fish or something really delicate, it is totally, totally possible. But my favorite way to use some of these oils is just as a finishing on things that oftentimes you wouldn't think about, like soup. You don't always think about soup, you think about maybe some pepper or something like that. A little drizzle of the olive oil, because the heat of the soup opens up all the aromas of the oil, and it is just lovely. Like you can have a basic tomato soup and drizzle a tiny bit of really good olive oil on top, and it just changes the whole thing. Also, like warm beans. One of my favorite dishes in the wintertime is just white beans with a little bit of New Harvest olive oil. And when I say New Harvest, harvest date matters. The date of your olive oil matters. I, as a buyer, it's very challenging, but I try to time my buying and predict how much we're going to sell so that we have olive oil for only 1 year. Because what I want to map out is so that when a new harvest comes in, I have virtually none of the old harvest left. And that the goal of that is to make sure that we are selling the absolute freshest olive oil possible. Olive oil is harvested in the Northern Hemisphere in usually anywhere around December, sometimes October and November, again, depending on when the olives ripen. And so sometimes we will have it air shipped to us. Or in the case of the California oil, we can have them just send it by FedEx. Sorry, totally lost my train of thought there. As it goes on and on, oil does diminish in quality. You have about 16 to 18 months of solid good use out of it, where it should be, and honestly, it should probably keep for about 2 years, but you really don't want to have it much longer than a year. That is your goal. So you want to kind of time it out. Oil is not something to cherish. You want to use it and, get a new fresh batch. And that is really, really important, and why I talk about kind of rancid oil, because that is something that will happen over time. You want to keep your oil in a cool, dark place. It does tend to go rancid faster if you keep it in the sunlight or if you keep it by the stovetop. One thing I've been trying to do is transition a lot of our olive oil into from bottles to tins. You'll see our shelf has a lot more tins on it than bottles. And that does help you when you get home, retain the freshness and the quality of the oil over time. So like I said, if it's within the year, you're fine. A year and a half, you're also fine, but you want to start after that 1 year point, you want to start using that up so that you can get onto the fresh batch. And I've actually just started working with a new producer in Peru, which is super, super, super exciting because they are in the Southern Hemisphere. And so they harvest their olive oil in March. And so that's super exciting for me to have a better balance. It's a great little organic farm, fantastic quality olive oil. But how cool is it that you could have a little bit more balance with the freshness of your oil? Because we're, very EU centric when it comes to olive oil, but it is produced in other places. So that is another fun thing that we're going to start. Yeah.
Do you see a big difference from producer from year to year in their product when you taste it?
Definitely. Not always a big difference, but definitely a difference. I think a lot of it has to do with, nowadays it has to do with the harvest quality. So oftentimes producers, where we used to get a single varietal, like in Liguria, we used to get a single varietal Taggiasca olive oil, and because of drought and things like that, the quality of the harvest is, or the volume of the harvest has just gone down and down. And so now they're just doing blends. So in that case, obviously, very, very different. But for the most part, it is fairly consistent. It's not quite the same as wine where, you know, you say this vintage is incredible or this vintage is not so good. You will notice some discernible differences, but I wouldn't say it's anything too dramatic. The most dramatic thing right now is honestly just the struggles of production. This is going to be the last olive oil that we tried tonight, but this is one of our most popular and best-selling olive oils in the shop, and I got a message from them that they were able to sell me by volume half of what I ordered last year, because their harvest was so poor, that's all that they could offer. So, and we're seeing that over and over and over again. So I think it's important for me, it was important to kind of diversify too and look at different producers and make sure that there's, because when you're seeing this year after year after year, you kind of wonder about the future of the harvest in these places, which is very, very sad because these are places that have been harvesting oil for generations. But then, so yeah, so that's kind of the biggest thing that I've noticed over the years, to be honest, more so than kind of nuance. All right, so we're doing this one next. So I gave myself a big bottle. So this is the Olio Tybee. This is a Sicilian one. Now, if you are looking at color, I'm sure you notice a very, very big difference in color. There are two different varietals that Olio Tybee does in Sicily. And I wanted to give you the more pungent peppery option, just to show you kind of a different style from what we've been tasting. And you can see the color, again, color has a slight indication on flavor. So when you look at a color, you can often tell what the flavor might taste like, but it has no effect on quality. So nothing about the color will tell you anything about the quality of the oil. All right. So this one's a lot grassier. I'd say fresh and fruity on the nose. That green olive fruit note. Michael and Ellen, I'm sorry in advance. All right. So this is what I would consider a very classic Italian oil. And it's actually, it reminds me, this is a very kind of traditional flavor profile of what you'd find in a Tuscan oil. Excuse me. All right. I want to taste one more time, because you get typically how I describe a lot of Tuscan oils, and this is Sicilian, and typically Sicilian, this is definitely more aggressive than a lot of traditional Sicilian oils, which was, that's why I intentionally wanted to pick this one for you. But the easiest way to describe it is grassy on the front with a nice peppery kick. And it really does have that kick. It definitely is a little bit milder on the front, not as strong, but then it really hits you in the finish. This is a great finishing oil if you want to add an intense level of pepperiness to any dish. What I love to do with salads is if you get really great fresh greens, to drizzle a little bit of this on it with just a little salt, and that's it. And then you get sort of this incredible pepperiness. If you need some acidity, you could do a little squeeze of lemon juice, but not totally necessary. But what did you think of that one? Fans? And I assume you tasted the difference between, you're seeing kind of the pattern of, you get the fruitiness, you get grassiness, you can see artichoke, you can see hay, sort of buttery qualities. All of these are really great adjectives to describe different olive oils and different characteristics. And it's great to taste it over and over again. And now you can kind of see why, it's really important to sip it, because you wouldn't always get as sort of detailed of a look of the entire quality of this oil if you were just dipping it in bread. All right. Now the last one. So this is the one that has a story behind it. So this is from Moulin Corny, and it is Jean-Marie Corny is the olive oil, and this is technically a virgin olive oil. Now, acidity wise, it could be called an extra virgin olive oil, but they don't want to. They made a decision a few years ago to not cause a hoopla. And they decided to deem it as virgin oil because it really did border the line of acidity between virgin and extra virgin. Now, I saw that Beth is surprised by the aroma. So let's go ahead. And I mean, you barely even have to swirl it to smell the aroma. I mean, that's pretty pronounced black olive flavor. Or scent. And so the reason for that is this is called, so this is a Provence olive oil. This is a blend of all of the common Provence olive oils that you would see. Grosson, Salonic, Picholine, what am I forgetting? I wrote Aglandau. And so it's a blend of all of these olive oils, but they actually purposefully attic the olives for 3 to 10 days. So you know how I was talking to you about, the rapid pace of, you must harvest and do everything quick. This is a traditional method that they have been doing for generations and generations, where they actually rack the olives and allow them to start the fermentation process. It is a very specified method to keep the quality of the oil without, they're not damaging the olives. They are gently racking them and allowing them to start that fermentation process so that you get this intense dark black fruit flavor, olive fruit flavor, when you have the final product of the oil. So then the rest is pressed just as you normally would. But it creates an oil that is unlike most traditional oils. So let's go ahead and try it. All right. So obviously the smell. Now what's fascinating is the lack of bitterness. Oftentimes, if you have a low quality oil, so to speak, or virgin oil, it tends to be very, very bitter on the finish. But this really just highlights the black olive fruit. You do get the undertone of olive oil, but then a nice, clean, smooth finish. And so the artful way in which they craft this oil is unbelievable. that they can retain this flavor profile of the black olive while maintaining a really quality, clean oil that has no bitterness is pretty exceptional. And that's, I think, why we love this oil so much and so many people love this oil so much. It is very unique in its uses. Obviously, you would not use this for just anything. One of my favorite uses is just rice, because anything that you use this in, it will taste as though you've blended in or mixed in black olives. And that is such an incredible sort of concept to think about, because it's just, yeah, and when you put a little heat to it, the aroma comes out even more. You can cook with it. You can lightly sear, say, fish with it, and the aroma will actually stay. You had a question?
Yeah, we cheated and started a little early tonight, and we put this one we're doing now on asparagus, and it was really good.
Awesome.
But don't tell our teacher that we'd started it. So everybody cool.
Sealed. But you see what I'm just so glad that you're able to try them side by side to see how drastically different this oil is than the others. Typically speaking, Provençal olive oil has a lot of grassy and buttery qualities. It does not tend to have a lot of pungency. So you rarely do find a Provençal olive oil that's going to be really peppery or pronouncedly bitter. So I love the fact that it does retain a lot of the quality of being this sort of light, luscious olive oil, but then you get that rich, ripe fruit. And this is a fun oil to play around with. It's a really, really fun oil to experiment with. And people will notice it. Like I said, if you sear a fish, or like if you do baked branzino or something like that and drizzle this after you pull it out of the oven, and the heat and the aroma, it's just unreal. Like I said, it's like you're incorporating olive into the dish without actually having to have the pulp or anything. It's just more the essence of the olive, which is a really, really fun concept. So hopefully you can use it and play around with it. Yeah, you have a question?
What about ROI?
Okay, so actually Roy is the one that I was referring to before, that had such the bad harvest that they went from a monocultivar to then having to do a blend. So they are known for their Taggiasca variety. It's a famous Ligurian producer, one of my all-time favorite olive oil producers. And so their Taggiasca, so this is the same olive varietal as what they're known for. And what's fun about their olive oils is they get really nerdy, because they will do, they have 3 different olive oils, all at different altitudes, to kind of show the same variety, but how different altitudes can affect the flavor. It's called Cru Riva, Cru Morga, and Cru. It starts with a G. I cannot remember the Italian name, but the 3 different, they all represent kind of the mountains, the ocean, and in between. And but their olive oil has almost no pepperiness to it when you get the 100% Taggiasca, and it is so buttery and grassy and lovely. I love it. And I mean, I was only able to show you just a spattering of what we have, which is there's just so many good olive oils out there. And it's what I do for my own olive oil consumption is the reason I got myself the big bottle of this is I had the new harvest of this, and I just am about to finish it, and I rotate through my finishing oils. So I'm just every single time I'm getting a different one. And I have my cooking oil, which is Riza, R-I-Z-A. I think Beth asked about that. And that's what I get in 3 liters, and I can feel good about cooking it with it, making vinaigrettes and things like that. But when I want to finish, I always just kind of rotate, because it's just fun. I don't know. It's just really great to try the different oils. I almost always have this one in my cupboard. It takes me about a year to go through it because it's not something that it's very specific. I don't use it on everything because it is such a unique flavor, but I always like to have it. So, but I always make sure during the fall, if I have a few bottles of olive oil, I always start to crank through them. And even if it's something that I call finishing oil, I will start to cook with it if I feel like, because I want to start, trying the new harvest oils. So it's good for me to kind of clean house, get rid of it so that I can get the fresh harvest in. So does anybody have any questions? You're welcome. Does anybody have any questions tonight? I know we kind of just covered the basics. There's so much more, but I hope that you're able to enjoy some of the pull-on bread, toasted and dipped. Definitely, if you want to geek out, warm up that olive oil a little bit more. Ellen, did you have a question?
Yeah, so about the bread, if you did not get the bread, she sent us a lot of bread. Like, it's a ridiculous, awesome amount of bread, but there's a lot of pressure. How do I store that? But you said it will last.
Yeah, so it'll last on your countertop for a week in a plastic bag, depending on how I don't go through bread super, super fast. So you can always cut it into, like, for me, this was a reasonable size portion. And so you can cut it, and actually it freezes really, really, really well.
Oh,
this is not a bread that you want to just cut and eat as is, because you want to toast it, you want to liven it back up. So that's why freezing is kind of perfect, because it adds a little bit more moisture back into the bread. So when you do toast it up, and you can even, one kind of trick to liven bread back up is just dip your fingers in a little bit of water and spritz it just a tiny bit before you pop it in the toaster oven or toaster, so that it just gets a little bit of steam and moisture in there. So
okay, thank you. And then I was in the kitchen toasting more bread when you said you spoke to the difference between the olive oil being in a glass bottle versus a tin. Can you say that again real quick?
Yeah, so in general, you don't want your olive oil exposed to light. It will increase how quickly it starts to go rancid. And so I've started to default to trying to get as much as I can in tins. A lot of these producers, like Jean-Marie Corny, we used to always get glass bottles, and they were clear bottles, which it just seemed so counterintuitive to have such a nice, high quality olive oil in a clear glass bottle. And so, yeah, that's why and then you see most olive oil is like this in a dark, dark glass. That does help it a lot more, but there's still permeability. So for me, I was just like, wow. And I also just like, personally, the look of the tins. If you are clumsy and drop a lot, it's always great to have a tin and not glass. So many benefits to the tins. But yeah, that's it. Really, the light was a big one. So yeah. Any other questions? Terrific. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I have one more. I'm sorry. I was waiting if anybody else had a question, but now I have one more. So we've done this class, and we've done your chocolate and cheese class, and we've done your cheese and honey class. And if you offer them again, are you going to do new stuff? Because we do them all again, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, cool.
I guess I'm hoping you do it again, because then we get all this awesome stuff and we know how to use it. And yeah, so are you going to keep offering these, I guess?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Because we'll do that.
We're going to keep offering them. And I just got back from Madrid. And so I really want to do a tapas class.
We would like for you to do a tapas class. Everybody thumbs up who wants
awesome.
To do there it is.
So yeah, so we have a lot of fun things planned. Tapas, French, sort of French themed, maybe in honor of Bastille Day. And yeah, so keep an eye out. We're going to try to keep a good cadence of doing them at least once a month or maybe twice a month. So yes. Any other questions?
Oh,
Yeah.
I have a comment. I just, I love when you give us ideas. And so if I like that you added on the bread, but when you add on those wonderful things that I might not be able to get, I'm down here in Florida. So if you could, the goat cheese, I got to say the goat cheese tonight with this olive oil is phenomenal.
Oh, good.
Yes. Extra suggestions are wonderful. I
You got
appreciate
it. You got it. And I'll preface everybody by Beth emailed me in advance to ask of what else to enjoy with the olive oil. So I will do that moving forward if we're doing something like this, some suggestions on other parents and whatnot, because I really do love, it's fun to be able to kind of focus a dinner around some just simple, lovely ingredients. It doesn't have to be, the more I've been in this industry, the more I've realized that simplicity is key. And it's just about a few really quality ingredients and how you use them versus, making things fussy and complicated. So that's going to be kind of that's how I eat at home. And that's how I like to share food and talk about food. Because you really do then get to pay homage to all these incredible producers and really taste what they've kind of put their soul into. So,
and get exposed to the beautiful things in your shop. I can't get up there. So if you can give us, I like the add-ons. I didn't get the bread, but oh my gosh, I love the add-ons.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much. This is all very new for us. So any feedback you have is fantastic. And just while I have you, my email address is julia@formaggiokitchen.com. The lovely two women who run our online division are Louisa and Meg, and they are at orders@formaggiokitchen.com. If you have any questions or suggestions for future classes, just shoot us a line. For me personally, in my email, if you have a random food question, let me know. I want to be an outlet for folks, because if I don't know the answer, I probably know someone who does. So utilize us as a resource, as much or as little as you need. We're happy to be there. And our goal is just to geek out about food and to get other people to kind of love it as much as we do. So I'm so thrilled that you all joined us tonight, because these have been really, really fun, and we're definitely going to keep doing them. So thank you so much. Cheers. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.